My name is Prudence. I'm 58, and I live in a little cottage nestled in the quiet, unassuming town of Pipsy, New York. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and a friendly wave is the standard greeting. My cottage, with its quaint rose garden and the old oak tree standing sentinel in the backyard, was my sanctuary. I used to love to laugh, to joke, to find the humor in every situation, even the bad ones. Or I guess, especially the bad ones. Life has this weird way of testing you, throwing curveballs when you least expect it. It's like the universe has a wicked sense of humor, always playful. And let me tell you, lately, it felt like I was the punchline to a cosmic joke that just wouldn't end, a never-ending saga of strange occurrences. It all started with the humming. Not the pleasant kind like a bee buzzing around a flower or a lullaby softly sung by a mother to her child. No, this was a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in my very bones, a constant, low thrum that seemed to emanate from the very air around me, permeating every nook and cranny of my existence. It started subtly, a barely perceptible tremor that I initially dismissed as some new appliance acting up, or perhaps just the usual city noise that sometimes filtered through my old cottage walls, a common occurrence in my otherwise quiet neighborhood. But it grew, day by day, escalating from a whisper to a roar, until it was an ever-present entity, a phantom soundtrack to my life, an eerie symphony of unknown origin. It was maddening, driving me to the edge of sanity. I tried everything to drown it out, to escape the incessant drone that had invaded my peaceful world. I cranked up music, loud and boisterous, blasting from my old record player, filling the room with a cacophony of sound that usually brought me joy. I used earplugs, the squishy kind that are supposed to block out the world, but they only muffled the hum, like trying to silence a thunderstorm with a cotton ball. A futile attempt to regain control. Even the television, cranked up to an almost unbearable volume, couldn't completely mask the incessant drone, the persistent hum that had become my constant, unwelcome companion. I even tried to cover my ears, to no avail. Sleep, once a welcome escape, became a luxury I could no longer afford. The hum was loudest at night, a deep, pulsating rhythm that echoed in the silence of my bedroom, keeping me awake, tossing and turning in my bed, my mind racing as I searched for answers that wouldn't come, a solution that seemed to elude me. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, the shadows dancing in the dim light, feeling like I was slowly losing my grip on reality, like I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare. My once peaceful cottage, my sanctuary, my haven from the world, had become a prison. The walls closing in on me. The humming, a constant reminder of my growing unease, of the invisible force that was slowly consuming me. Then came the doctor. A young man named Dr. Albright, with kind eyes and a reassuring smile, a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. He listened patiently as I described my symptoms, as I tried to put into words the strange phenomenon that had taken over my life. He ran tests, poked and prodded, shone lights in my eyes, and tapped my knees with a little rubber hammer, a routine I had become accustomed to over the years. He ordered scans, MRIs, and CTs, my body sliding in and out of those large humming machines, which ironically almost masked the internal hum. A small twisted mercy, a brief respite from the constant drone, but the results always came back the same. Normal. "There's nothing physically wrong with you, Mrs. Ainsworth," he'd say, his brow furrowing in a way that didn't quite match his comforting words, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "Perhaps it's stress-related. Anxiety. Have you been under a lot of pressure lately? Any major life changes?" Stress. Anxiety. Maybe. I mean, who wouldn't be stressed with a constant unexplained hum driving them to the brink of insanity, with a noise that no one else could hear, that seemed to exist only in my head? But I knew deep down in the core of my being that it was something more, something else, something inexplicable, something that defied logic and reason, something that science couldn't explain. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The humming became my constant companion, an unwelcome guest who had overstayed its welcome, a shadow that followed me everywhere, a presence that I couldn't shake. I started seeing things too, flickers in the periphery, shadows that moved when I wasn't looking, whispers in the dead of night that sounded suspiciously like my name, a ghostly chorus calling out to me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, the humming vibrating through my body, feeling like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, about to fall into an abyss of madness, into a darkness that I couldn't escape. My friends, bless their hearts, tried to understand. They'd come over, bringing food, offering to stay the night, their faces etched with worry, with a concern that I could see mirrored in their eyes. But how could I explain what I was experiencing when I couldn't even understand it myself? How could I describe the unseen, the unheard, the unfelt to those who lived in a world that made sense? A world that didn't hum, a world that was grounded in reality. How could I tell them about the hum when they could not hear it? I was alone in the end, isolated in my own private hell. The humming, my only companion, my constant tormentor. The only thing that was with me all the time was that infernal hum, a constant reminder of my isolation, of my descent into a world that no one else could comprehend. I started losing weight, my clothes hanging loose on my once full frame, my body becoming a shadow of its former self. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a gaunt, hollow-eyed woman with dark circles under her eyes and a haunted look that scared even me. A look that spoke of sleepless nights and a troubled mind. I was fading away, becoming a ghost in my own life. The humming slowly consuming me, body and soul. Leaving behind an empty shell, I found myself going to church more often, although not my childhood church. My parents, God rest their souls, had raised me Protestant in a small, unassuming church on the outskirts of town. But I had always found their practices odd and felt that something was missing. A void that I could never quite fill. A piece of the puzzle that I couldn't put my finger on. There was always this nagging feeling that there was more, that I was missing something essential, something fundamental to my faith. I had been hopping around to different Protestant churches over the years, searching for something that resonated with me, something that felt right. But I had found that they were all the same, each one a variation on a theme, a different flavor of the same unsatisfying dish. At one point, I even tried to get into Judaism, seeing as it was the origin of Christianity, the root from which my faith had sprung. I thought perhaps by going back to the beginning, I could find what I was looking for, that missing piece. But even then, amid the ancient rituals and traditions, I couldn't help but feel like something was off, that something was still missing, that I was still searching for something that eluded me. Then about 5 years ago, I stumbled upon a small church tucked away on a quiet street, a hidden gem in the bustling city. It wasn't grand or imposing like some of the cathedrals I had seen, but it had a certain charm, a quiet dignity that drew me in and spoke to something deep within me. The services were different, filled with rituals and traditions that were foreign to me, yet strangely comforting, like a long-forgotten memory stirring within my soul. I started attending regularly, drawn in by the sense of peace I found within those walls, the peace that eluded me everywhere else, a tranquility that I couldn't find anywhere else in my life. I never officially joined the church, though I always intended to. I kept telling myself that I would do it next week or next month, but something always held me back. Fear, maybe, or uncertainty. I wasn't sure. Perhaps it was the fear of commitment, of fully embracing a faith that was still so new to me. But I kept coming back, week after week, drawn in by the rituals, the chants, the incense, the icons, the rhythm of the service. It was like stepping into another world, a world that was both ancient and timeless, a world that offered a sense of belonging I had never found anywhere else, a sense of connection to something larger than myself. I found solace in the prayers, in the hymns, in the rhythmic swaying of the priest as he blessed the icons, in the smell of incense that filled the air. It was a balm to my soul, a temporary reprieve from the humming that plagued me, a moment of peace in the chaos of my life. One evening, as I sat in my usual pew, the priest's words washed over me, speaking of sin, of repentance, of the eternal consequences of our actions, of the weight of our choices. His voice was deep and resonant, echoing through the small church and filling every corner with a sense of solemnity, of gravity, of the importance of the message he was conveying. I listened intently, my heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. The humming, a dull throb in the background, a constant reminder of the turmoil within me. I had never been a bad person. Not really. I had always tried to live a good life, to be kind to others, to do the right thing, to follow the golden rule. But I had made mistakes. Of course, mistakes that everyone makes. I had told lies. I had hurt people. I had been selfish, angry, envious. I had sinned. And suddenly in that moment, the weight of those sins felt heavier than ever before. A crushing burden that threatened to suffocate me. A burden that I had carried for so long without truly acknowledging it. The priest spoke of hell, of the eternal fire, of the torment that awaited those who turned away from God, of the consequences of a life lived in sin. I had always dismissed those stories as metaphors, allegories, ancient tales meant to scare people into submission, to control them, to keep them in line. But now, sitting there in the dimly lit church, the humming a constant reminder of my own inner turmoil, of the darkness that I felt within me, I wasn't so sure. What if it was? What if there was a place of eternal punishment? A place where sinners were condemned to suffer for all eternity? A place where the consequences of our actions were inescapable? What if the stories were true? The thought terrified me, sending a chill down my spine, a shiver of fear that I couldn't shake. The humming grew louder, more insistent, as if mirroring the growing fear in my heart, the rising panic that I felt within me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, my hands trembling in my lap, my body reacting to the terror that was gripping my soul. I wanted to run, to escape the church, the priest's words, the humming, the fear, to flee from the overwhelming sense of dread that was consuming me. But I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, my mind paralyzed by a terror I had never known before, a fear that was both primal and profound. It was then, in that moment of utter despair, that the humming reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the church in my being. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the humming, more profound, more absolute. A silence so complete that it felt like the end of the world, like the void that awaited me, like the silence of the grave. In a way, for me, it was the beginning of the end, the start of a journey that would change my life forever. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and collapsed, my body slumping forward in the pew, my consciousness fading into darkness, into the unknown. It wasn't a gentle fading, like drifting off to sleep, like the peaceful transition from wakefulness to slumber. It was abrupt, sudden, like a light switch being flipped off, like a curtain falling on a stage, like a door slamming shut. One moment I was there, in the church, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds, by the comforting rituals, by the presence of something greater than myself. And the next, I was nowhere. Or maybe somewhere. It was hard to tell. There was no light, no sound, no sensation of any kind, no feeling of anything, no sense of anything. Just a void, a vast empty nothingness that stretched out in all directions, an infinite expanse of emptiness, of oblivion. I was floating, unmoored, adrift in a sea of nothingness, with no sense of direction, no sense of time, no sense of self. I tried to scream, to cry out, but no sound escaped my lips. My voice was trapped within me, unable to break the silence. I tried to move, to reach out, but my limbs felt heavy and unresponsive, like lead weights, unable to budge in the nothingness. I was trapped, alone, lost in a darkness that seemed to go on forever, an eternity of nothingness with no escape, with no hope of rescue. Then, just as I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, just as I was about to surrender to the void, to the nothingness, to oblivion, something changed. A flicker of light appeared in the distance, a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer in the vast darkness, a tiny spark in the infinite void. And it was growing, expanding, drawing me in, pulling me toward it like a moth to a flame, like a ship to a lighthouse, like a lost soul toward salvation. I was going somewhere, but where? And why? The light grew brighter, more intense, until it was all I could see, until it consumed my entire being, until it filled the void that had surrounded me. It wasn't a harsh light, like the glare of the sun on a summer day, but a soft, warm glow, like the light of a candle in a dark room, like the gentle warmth of hearth fire on a cold winter night. It enveloped me, surrounded me, filled me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in, I can't remember how long. It felt like a lifetime, like an eternity had passed since I had felt anything but fear, anything but the humming, anything but the darkness. Maybe it had been time. Time seemed to have lost all meaning in this strange ethereal place, a realm beyond the world I knew, beyond the reality I understood. I wasn't sure what was going on, what was happening to me, or where I was going. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, of calm, of serenity. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light began to fade, receding like the tide going out, like the setting sun disappearing below the horizon, leaving me once again in darkness. But this wasn't the same darkness as before. This darkness was different. It was colder, heavier, more oppressive, more menacing. It felt alive, like a living entity, a presence that surrounded me, that watched me, that waited. And it was filled with sounds, not the humming, thank God, not the incessant drone that had plagued me for so long, but sounds that were far more disturbing, far more terrifying, far more real. Screams, wails, moans, cries of pain and despair. A cacophony of suffering that echoed through the darkness, chilling me to the bone, to the very core of my being. It sounded like what I thought hell would sound like. But I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept the reality of what I was hearing, of where I might be. I tried to cover my ears, to block out the horrific sounds, but it was no use. They were everywhere, all around me, inside me, penetrating my very being, filling me with a sense of dread and horror that was almost unbearable, that threatened to overwhelm and consume me. I wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped in this nightmare, this infernal abyss, with no way out, no escape from the torment, from the suffering, from the darkness. I felt like a small boat tossed about in a stormy sea, at the mercy of the waves, with no land in sight, with no hope of rescue, with no one to save me. And then I saw them. Shapes. Figures moving in the darkness. Their forms were indistinct, shadowy, but their presence was undeniable. Their existence unmistakable. They were everywhere, surrounding me, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light, their hands reaching out, grasping, clawing, their touch like ice, like fire, like death. I could hear their voices, whispering, hissing, their words unintelligible, but their meaning clear, their intent obvious. They were coming for me. They were hunting me. They were going to drag me down into the darkness, into the depths of hell itself. I tried to fight, to resist, but it was useless. They were too strong, too many, too powerful. They dragged me down, down into the depths of the darkness, into the heart of the abyss, into the depths of hell itself. I could feel the heat now, a searing, suffocating heat that burned my skin, scorched my lungs, made my eyes water. A heat unlike anything I had ever felt before. The screams grew louder, more intense. The cries of pain and despair mingling with the crackling of flames, the hissing of steam, the stench of sulfur filling the air. A stench so thick and heavy it choked me, made me gag. There was no doubt about it. This was hell. This was the place of eternal torment. The place of no return, the place where sinners were punished for their sins, where they paid the ultimate price for their choices. I saw horrible things, things that I can't even bring myself to describe, things that will forever be seared into my memory, things that I will never be able to unsee, that will haunt me for the rest of my days. I saw people, or what were once people, their bodies twisted, contorted, their faces frozen in expressions of agony, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. They were being tortured, tormented, subjected to unimaginable horrors, their screams echoing through the darkness. A never-ending symphony of suffering. A chorus of pain that would never cease. I saw a man, his body engulfed in flames, his skin blistering and peeling, his eyes burning with an unbearable pain. A pain that went beyond physical suffering, reaching into his very soul. He was screaming, begging for mercy, but there was no one to hear him, no one to help him, no one to save him from the fire. He was alone, abandoned, condemned to suffer for all eternity, his torment never ending, his pain without end. The fire was consuming him, eating away at his flesh, turning him into a living, burning skeleton, a grotesque mockery of the man he once was. I saw a woman, her body stretched on a rack, her limbs pulled in opposite directions, her bones creaking and cracking, her screams echoing through the darkness, a sound that pierced the air like a knife. She was being torn apart slowly, agonizingly, her body stretched beyond its limits, her pain unimaginable, her suffering beyond comprehension. Save her, to end her suffering. But there was no one. Just the fire, just her pain, just the endless torment, the never-ending agony, and the demons that inflicted more and more pain. I saw a group of people, their bodies chained together, forced to march through a lake of fire, their feet sinking into molten rock, their flesh burning, their screams mingling with the crackling of the flames, a horrific chorus of pain and despair. They were being driven forward by demons, creatures of pure evil, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light, their whips lashing out, striking the prisoners, driving them on, forcing them to endure an eternity of pain, of suffering, of torment. I saw people being eaten alive by insects, their bodies covered in swarms of biting, stinging creatures, their screams echoing through the darkness, a sound that was both terrifying and sickening. I saw people being boiled alive in cauldrons of oil, their skin melting, their flesh bubbling, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. I saw people being impaled on spikes, their bodies pierced, their blood flowing, their screams a constant, unending chorus of pain, a symphony of suffering that would never end. Their eyes pleaded for help, but there was no one who could save them. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold, something that froze me to the spot, something that I will never forget. I saw a group of people, their bodies huddled together, their faces pale with fear, their eyes wide with terror, their bodies trembling. They were watching a scene unfold before them, a scene of such horror, such depravity, that it made me want to vomit, to retch, to empty my stomach of its contents. I saw a man, his body naked, his hands bound, being tortured by a group of demons. They were cutting him, slicing him, tearing his flesh, their laughter echoing through the darkness, a cruel, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine, that made my skin crawl. The man was screaming, begging for mercy, but the demons only laughed, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light, their mouths twisted into cruel smiles. They were enjoying his pain, reveling in his suffering, taking pleasure in his torment and his agony. Then one of them stepped forward, a knife in his hand, and plunged it into the man's chest, piercing his heart and ending his life, but not his suffering. The man's scream stopped abruptly, his body went limp, his eyes stared blankly ahead, his life extinguished, but his torment continued. The demons continued their work, cutting him open, removing his organs, tearing him apart piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a bloody, mangled mess, a grotesque pile of flesh and bone. Then they turned their attention to the group of people who had been forced to watch, their eyes glowing with anticipation, their mouths twisted into cruel smiles, their intentions clear. They were next. They were going to be subjected to the same torture, the same torment, the same fate. I couldn't watch any longer. I closed my eyes, squeezed them shut, trying to block out the horrific scene. The screams, the laughter, the stench of blood and death, the images of torment and suffering. But it was no use. The images were burned into my mind, seared into my memory, forever etched into my soul, into my very being. I was in hell, and there was no escape. There was no way out, no way to avoid the torment, the suffering, the pain. As I continued my descent into the abyss, the swirling vortex of fire and shadow seemed to pull me deeper, like a relentless tide dragging me further out to sea. The scenes of torment became more specific, more targeted, each one a grotesque tableau illustrating the consequences of a particular sin, each one a vivid, horrifying lesson in the wages of sin. It was as if the demons were conducting a twisted tour, a horrifying showcase of the wages of sin, each exhibit more gruesome than the last, each one designed to instill a deeper sense of terror and despair. The fire was a constant, a living entity that danced and writhed, casting eerie shadows on the tormented souls. The screams were constant, a symphony of suffering that echoed through the abyss, a chorus of pain that never ceased, never offered a moment of respite. I saw a group of people, their bodies emaciated, their skin stretched taut over their bones, their eyes sunken and hollow, like empty sockets staring out from skeletal faces. They were clawing at each other, fighting over scraps of food, their hunger insatiable, their desperation palpable, their movements frantic and desperate. These, I realized with a shudder and a chill running down my spine, were the gluttonous, those who had indulged their appetites without restraint, who had consumed without thought for others, who had prioritized their own desires above all else, who had made food their god. Now, in this infernal realm, they were condemned to an eternity of starvation, an endless hunger that could never be satisfied, their bodies forever wasting away, their torment a grotesque parody of their earthly indulgence. The fire burned around them, adding to their torment and mocking their insatiable hunger with its searing heat. Next, I witnessed a scene of utter chaos and debauchery, a scene so vile, so depraved that it made my stomach churn. People were entwined in a grotesque orgy, their bodies writhing together in a frenzy of lust and depravity, their movements fueled by a desperate, insatiable desire. Their faces were contorted in expressions of both pleasure and pain, their eyes glazed over, their bodies glistening with sweat, their moans and cries mingling with the screams of the other damned souls. These were the fornicators, the adulterers, those who had indulged their carnal desires without restraint, who had broken their vows, betrayed their loved ones, and defiled their bodies, who had treated their bodies as instruments of pleasure rather than temples of the Holy Spirit. Now they were trapped in an endless cycle of lust and torment, desires never satisfied, their bodies forever burning with a fire that could never be quenched, their punishment a twisted reflection of their earthly sins. There was a special place in that fire-filled pit for those who had engaged in homosexual acts. Their pain seemed even more unimaginable, their torment, hence their screams, more desperate. I'm sorry, I can't comply with that request. Sorry, I can't assist with that. 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 Sorry, I can't assist with that.